Good morning, Yaakov.
Morning, Rabbi.
Oh, Baruch Hashem, you can hear me? I can hear you. It's good. Okay, vamos. Freilach. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Mem Hey. We are in the middle of the sugya of Heter Mitztaref Le'Iser and Tam Ke'Iker. And as we concluded yesterday, that really we have a Machloikes Tanoim. In the Parsha of Nazir, the Torah speaks about a specific prohibition for the Nazir not to have anything, any food that is infused with a grape product. Mimishras. The Chachamim learn from the Mimishras the rule of Tam Ke'Iker. And furthermore, they use now the Nazir as the ground zero that teaches that in the B'chol HaTorah T'kula, we say the rule of Tam Ke'Iker. According to Rabbi Akiva, and based on Rabbi Akiva was Rabbi Boam, Rabbi Yechanan, that Mimishras is teaching you something which is even a greater Chiddush. And that is that Heter Mitztaref Le'Iser. And as we explained, for a person to get malchus, for Nazir to get malchus for eating great product, he has to eat the amount of a kazayis. What happens if the Nazir has bread that's soaked into wine? Together you have a kazayis. From the wine itself, there's half a kazayis. The bread is half of a kazayis. And yet you say that Heter Mitztaref Le'Iser because the bread is infused with wine. It's soaked in wine. So from Mimishras, Rabbi Akiva learns Heter Mitztaref Le'Iser. We're going to close up that sugya, and then we're going to move on Daf Mem Hey Amud Aleph to the new Mishnah. I'll call this a Brazilian Mishnah. I'll explain why. The Mishnah is speaking about dough, batzek, shebesit ke'areva. You have a kneading trough that has a crack in it, and the owner, the balabayas, fixed the keli, fixed this utensil by taking a piece of dough and by inserting it, by wedging it in the crack, sealing the crack. Now, this dough is chametz. However, there will be times that since the owner wants to leave the dough in the crack, ubemela, it's batel. It's no longer considered food. It's considered part of the keli, whether the keli is made out of wood, whether the keli is made out of earthenware. So it's not chametz. It's not an issue. Let's say it's not an issue of bal yirah, bal yamatzah. You're not owning chametz on Pesach. That will be l'shitas Rashi. There'll be other times that we won't consider the dough, the batzek, bottled to the keli, and then you will have to remove it before Pesach. Now, here in America, to take a piece of dough and to fix a keli is something that, you learn the Mishnayos. In Brazil, this is mamash ma'asim b'chol yom. That's the minig hamadina. You have a keli that's broken, and they take pride. They call this o jeitinho brasileiro. That makes sense. You have a keli, and you fix it by sticking dough in it. And the whole sugya, whether for Pesach, it's a problem of chametz. Then the Mishnah says, v'chein le'inyan tuma. V'chein le'inyan tuma. Now, part of the Mishnah, part of the criterion whether it's going to be considered chametz or not will be the quantity of the dough. Kazayis versus not kazayis. That's by Pesach. When the Mishnah says, v'chein le'inyan tuma, there's going to be ultimately four ways of understanding it. Two of the approaches we'll learn today at the end of the daf. Either it's speaking about a din of chatzitza, that if a keli, a trough, became tummy and you're toiveling it, question is whether the dough that's wedged in the crack, whether that creates a chatzitza or not, even though that really, if the issue is of chatzitza, it has nothing to do with the size of a kazayis, it has to do with the owner's kpeda, whether he plans to leave it there, whether it bothers him that it's there, so he plans to remove it. We're going to have a second approach today, how we'll understand the Mishnah, and then God willing, tomorrow in Daf Mem Vav, we'll learn two other ways of understanding the ending of the Mishnah here on Daf Mem Hey. So, Chavre, without any further ado, let's go inside, just to chazar over the flow over here. So, Nachamo, Mimishras by Nazir is the source for the Chachamim that Tam Ke'Iker. And they learned from Nazir l'chalot Torah kula. According to Rabbi Akiva, Mishras teaches you a greater chiddush, and it's a greater chiddush that a heter is mitztaref le'ised, that the nazir will get malchus, even though the nazir did not consume a kazayis of grape product. But since the grape product was mixed together with the bread, was soaked in the wine, and he ate a total of a kazayis, heter mitztaref le'ised. So we left off yesterday by the Gemara asking the following question: according to the Chachamim, Mishras is tam ke'ikir, but tam ke'ikir is not a din by nazir; it's a din l'chalot Torah kula. So why don't we say, let Rabbi Akiva, who understands Mishnah, teaching you the din of heter mitzdaref le'isr, why doesn't this now become a teacher l'chol ha'torah kula that we should always say this chumrah of heter mitzdaref le'isr? So the Gemara answered, that was the top of the Amid. Hold on. True, according to Rabbi Akiva, Nazir is an exception where we say by Nazir heter mitzdaref le'isr, but since by chatos we also find this rule that heter mitzdaref le'isr, that's where we did not yet explain yesterday, we'll begin today. So now you're going to have shnei ksuvim abayim ki echad, and now we have the rule shnei ksuvim abayim ki echad ve'ein melamdim, which is very logical, because if Nazir would have been a teacher l'chol ha'torah kula, then why would the Torah have to repeat the rule of heter mitzdaref le'isr by chatos? Or if the Torah would have written it by chatos, why would the Torah have to repeat it by Nazir? The fact that Hashem has to repeat a rule 2 times is a raya that we only say it in those 2 times. They are the exception, they're not the rule. Now we have to see, where is it that by chatos do we find the rule of heter mitzdaref le'isr? It's tam lahoyer that when we learned yesterday or 2 days ago when we began the sugya that chutz mi Nazir, and then we had a zeiri chutz from Bal Taktiru. Now we're learning more and more exceptions to it. But good. So says the Gemara Nazir, 2 lines from the top of the Amid, Hada Amaran, Le Rabbi Akiva the Mishras. Chatos Mayi de Tanyon. The Braisa is focusing on a pasuk in Parshas Tzav. The pasuk reads Koil asher yiga b'psara, that whatever will touch its meat. The parsha there is speaking about the basar of a chatos, which is kachi kachi. So if anything else touches its meat, anything else means a shlamim, right? Kachi kalim, or chulin meat. Yigdash becomes consecrated, becomes sanctified like the meat of the chatos. In other words, if you have a meat of a chatos and some other food, another meat touches it, so all of the rules, all of the restrictions that are said regarding the basar chatos is said regarding that other meat as well. Hold on. Says the Braisa, Yachal afilu loy bala. Just contact, we know that from Yoredeya. If it's cold, if it's not soaking together, there's no imparting of the juices of one to the other. So the Gemara, so the Talmud Leimer says the Braisa, no, just touch doesn't do it. The basar kachi kalim, the basar chulin has to absorb some of the kachi kachim, and that's why the Torah says koil asher yiga b'bisara, in its flesh. And then on that we say ache yivla b'basar, has to the kodesh juices from the chatos has to permeate, has to become absorbed in that other piece of meat. And now it says yigdash, says the Braisa, yigdash means mamish, liyois kamoyo. It has the same status. So for example, if the meat of the chatos was already psula, it was already disqualified for whatever reason, it was noisar, it was psul yoitze, it was lina, then hiti pasal. Then this meat becomes pasal like it. And the im kesheda, even if the chatos is proper kosher chatos meat, still the new meat that has in it from the abelias of the chatos is toichal kachamer shaba. All of the chumras that we have, for example, kachi kachim can only be eaten in the azara. Kachi kalim, after the avoida, can be eaten in the whole Yerushalayim. But if the shlamim has in it some of the chatos, it can only be eaten in the azara. Kachi kachim can only be eaten by male kohanim. Kachi kalim can be eaten by anyone, certainly chulin. Well, now it has to be eaten only by male kohanim. Chatos can only be eaten for 1 day and 1 night. Shlamim, without this belias, can be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. So whatever rules we have, whatever chumrah we have regarding one affects the other. Now everything else, you have to now chap yourself, and that's not so pashut. Says the Chidush Haran, explaining the Gemara, explaining the chatos raya. Why would you say it's that way? Why would you say that if the basar of chulin has in it something from the chatos, it becomes like a chatos? I would say tam ke'ikr. If you tell any person who learns a little bit of Yoredeya today, he'll explain it that way. Has nothing to do with heter mitzdaref le'isr. In other words, the tam of the chatos, because of the heat, there was a belia, or because it soaked for 24 hours, went into the basar chulin. And by the way, that's tam, the criterion that we used yesterday, based on many rishonim, flavor, substance. How do you define flavor versus substance? If it's discernible to the eye, you can call it substance. If you cannot see it, we call that flavor. Yeah. So if the juices of the chatos went into the chulin meat, you don't see the chatos. That should be a classical tam. And taken. That's takatam keikir. However, there might be another way of understanding the Braisa. What will be the other way of understanding the Braisa? That the chumrah of this pasuk isn't only when the juices of the chatos is nivla in the entire basar chulin. What's going to happen if the juices of the chatos only gets absorbed in part of the basar of the chulin, but it's less than a kazayis, or in a part, but you are eating from that part less than a kazayis, and you're also eating another half of a kazayis from the other part of the chulin or shlama meat that has no belias altogether. Even here, the Torah is saying yigdash. It's as if you ate an entire kazayis. Now, why would we stretch that pasuk to go to the point that heter mitzaref le'iser? So it says the Chidush Haran, beautiful. He says, listen, we already learned yesterday. We have a source of tam ke'iker. Let's go by Giyuli Nachem. We know from Giyuli Nachem. We have a source of heter mitzaref le'iser. We're speaking with Rabbi Akiva from Nazir. However you'll explain this pasuk over here, this braisa from Parshas Tzav, it's going to make one of those two dinim as shnei ksuvim haboim kiyachad. So it's either this is going to be another din of tam ke'iker, and then you're going to have tam ke'iker shnei ksuvim haboim kiyachad, and then tam ke'iker will never be learned in any other area in the Torah. And if you're going to limit this braisa, and you're going to extend it only to the more extreme case, to the greater novelty of heter mitzaref le'iser, then you're going to create a heter mitzaref le'iser, a shnei ksuvim haboim kiyachad. And that will be something that the ein melamdim. So Rabbi, that's what all the Chidush Haran is explaining. So Rabbi Akiva feels that it's more mistaber. Since heter mitzaref le'iser is a greater chiddush, it should be more limited. So it's better to make this pasuk, to limit this pasuk in the most extreme case, rendering heter mitzaref le'iser shnei ksuvim, nazir, and now chatos, and allowing tam ke'iker only to have one source, Gi'uli Nachrim, and therefore allowing the rule of tam ke'iker to be a malamed l'chol ha'Torah kula, versus if you're going to learn this braisa only in the case where the entire meat that the Torah says yigdash has in it the belias of achatas, now you're going to have shnei ksuvim by tam ke'iker. So tam ke'iker won't be applied to anywhere. It's better. No, it's one of these two will not be able to be taught in the chol ha'Torah kula. You have to either say that heter mitzaref le'iser is exceptional or tam ke'iker is exceptional. We rather make the greater chiddush exceptional. Beautiful. Now, obviously, the kasha will now be against the chachamim, because the chachamim b'chlal reject the whole concept of heter mitzaref le'iser, but the chachamim do hold of tam ke'iker. But now the chachamim also have two sources for tam ke'iker. They have mishras, the chachamim learning from mishras, and now they have chatos. So now, l'chachamim, why don't they limit tam ke'iker only to nazar and techatos? V'rabbanon, that's the Gemara's kasha. They reject heter mitzaref le'iser, but nami nehevet nazar v'chatos shnei ksuvim kiyachad. They're not going to stretch this braisa the way Rabbi Akiva does. That it's even if you have part of a kazayis that has in it the belias of chatos and another part that doesn't. They never are mitzaref. It's the normal pshat, the way anyone would read this braisa. You learn your other day. Yeah, the chatos has it, the basar chulin has it, the belias of chatos, nekuda, all of it has it. But now you have shnei ksuvim, the ein melamdim. But everyone is moided that tam ke'iker is a klal in the whole Yoreh Deah. Answers the Gemara, Amri, the Chachamim will say, for them, Hanu mitzrach tzrichi. It's not shnei ksuvim kiyachad. The Torah needed to write the din of tam ke'iker both by nazar and by chatos. Now we're going to see what it is in a moment, and then we're going to have to explain why the Rabbi Akiva it's not needed. Rabbi Akiva will hold. Rabbi Akiva, who understands this to be the rule of heter mitzaref le'iser, Rabbi Akiva will hold the Torah did not have to write it twice, which is why ein melamdim. Now we'll explain that Rabbi Akiva might tzricha. We're going first to explain the Rabbi Akiva side. Rabbi Akiva holds that they are not needed because, true, if the Torah only would have written the rule, li Rabbi Akiva, of heter mitzaref le'iser, by the chatos that we just learned today, you're right. I know that you can argue that like Gomar Nazir Mina, that dinim in Nazir would not be learned from chatos. Truth be told, no din will be learned from chatos, no din of chulin, because there is a klal that we have by kachim, which is the chulin mikachim like Gomrinon. Elo, however, lichlev derachman ben Nazir, it would have sufficed Rabbi Akiva, who understands Mishras by Nazir to teach you Heter Mitzdaref Le'Iser, and we on our own, now we have a Kal V'Chaymer. The Teisei Chatas are taking Ramino. Why? Because the Hakol Isurim Shabbat Torah Kagama Minazir. It's not only that Kachim can be learned, from Chulin, but as we learned on top of Daf Mem Daled Amid Beis, that Nazir has 3 leniencies, and still we say Heter Mitzdaref Le'Iser. It would have been the greatest source to make a Kal V'Chaymer. So now the Rabbanan, meaning the Rabbanan don't even Bechlal understand this to be a case of Heter Mitzdaref Le'Iser. Not by Nazir, not by Chatas. The problem now is that the Rabbanan, there's 2 sources for Tam Ke'ikr. So Amri Lach, no, it's not 2 sources. Each one was needed. Mitzrach Tzrichim. Chatas, the Heter Mitzdaref Le'Iser. If the Torah only would have written Chatas and Takavir, if the Torah only would have written it over there, then the Chachamim would have understood that the Braisa of Chatos is not Tam Ke'ikr. They would have then understood, they would have limited the din of Chatos to Heter Mitzdaref Le'Iser. And V'chulin Mikachim Lo Gamar. That's how they learned. That's how they learned the Chatos. Mishras is only to tell you the din, Litin Tam Ke'ikr Umikana Tadon L'Chala Torah Kulam. It's very good. So the Chachamim now the comeback of the Chachamim is that, you know what? By Kachim, they are moide that Heter Mitzdaref Le'Iser. The novelty of Chatas, if it only would have been to teach you a case of Tam Ke'ikr, we know that from a Nazir. And Kol Shchein, it would have been by Kachim. So the Chachamim now will teach that the Chatas Braisa that we learned is going even further. That Taka by Kachim, Heter Mitzdaref Le'Iser. But that's only by Kachim. And the whole din of Mishras, of Nazir, is Tam Ke'ikr. And that is the source, L'Chala Torah Kulam. The Rabbi Akiva, Tarvayu, Leheter Mitzdaref Le'Iser. Rabbi Akiva understands not only Chatos as Heter Mitzdaref Le'Iser, but Nazir is also a din of Heter Mitzdaref Le'Iser. So you have 2 repetitions. And the beauty about the sugi is that the bottom line is Bein Rabbi Akiva, Bein Chachamim, they both agree that Tam Ke'ikr is a klal that we tackle learn b'chol Torah kol. That's a very important klal when it comes to Yored Day. Okay. Now, let's go back to this concept, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Bo, Rabbi Yechanan, that by Nazir we do apply this combination principle, Heter Mitzdaref Le'Iser. Elo, how do you explain the following Braisa? In Parshas of the Nazir and Parshas Nasoi, where the Torah says, that anything that is made from grape product, again, machlokes, whether chartzanim are peels, whether chartzanim are seeds. Chitas, Rashi says chartzanim is peels, ba'adzog until seeds. And the Torah limeid alisure Nazir shemitztarfim ze im ze. In other words, says Rashi 2 lines under the Gemara, since the pasuk is koilel, chartzanim, and zogim, the peels and the seeds. B'chada achila, in one don't eat. In one don't eat. That teaches you, says the Braisa, that they combine. That means if you have some seeds and some peels, together you ate a kazayis. There's a limud that you are chayav chata, you're chayav a korban, you're chayav malchus. I'm sorry, you're chayav malchus for eating. Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. According to Rabbi Akiva, and subsequently Rabbi Yechanan, if we already know from Mishnahs that Heter is Mitzdaref Le'Iser, means if a Nazir, Bechlal didn't even eat a whole kazayis of a davar ha'asa. He ate a kazayis of half kazayis bread, half kazayis wine. You're already going to be chayiv. So bebas achas, misafer iser ve'iser miboya. So if half kazayis is chatzanim and half is zog, of course you'll be chayiv malchus. Why is there a need to learn to have a limud for that? Wow. So answers the Gemara, guys. Every step sheds so much light. Says the Gemara Amar Lei that yes, Rabbi Akiva holds Heter Mitzdaref Le'Iser. And by the way, what did we learn yesterday? Let's just add something in addition. There's a concept of any achila that's done in the time that it takes one to eat a pras. All of that is considered one maisa achila. Now I'll do this by heart. What happens if a nazir is going to eat a half a kazayis of bread that's not mishrast? It's not infused with wine. He's going to have a half a kazayis of bread, and then he's going to have half a kazayas of wine. Even according to Rabbi Akiva, that heter mitzdaref le'isur, no one is going to say that you're chayiv malchus, because I know that within pras, b'toich zman achilas pras, you ate an entirety of a kazayas, but they were never together. What we learned of heter mitzdaref le'isur is if you have bread dipped, infused with wine, and you have a sheet of a kazayas, the kazayas is not only of the wine, the kazayas is part bread, part wine, and you ate it slowly. But every time you took a bite into it, you were eating the heter and the isur together. If you ate up the whole kazayas, b'toich achilas paras, yes, that's heter mitzdaref le'isur. The chiddush of this brayse is that if a nazir ate a half a kazayas only of the chartzanim, and then he ate another half a kazayas only of the zog, since each eating was of something that is a standalone isur, and he ate them both within the time of paras, that is what this brayse is saying. They will combine. Let's read it inside. Amalei, isur veheter. When do we say Rabbi Akiva heter mitzdaref le'isur? Only if you eat it the basachas. The basachas, like we said, doesn't mean you have to gulp it down in one shot. You can eat it over a period of achilas paras. But every time you take a bite, you have to have in your mouth both the heter and the isur. The novelty of this last brayse is isur ve'isur. Even b'zeh achar. And Zajac can be over, let's say, let's say it's 9 minutes. It can be within 9 minutes. In the beginning of 9 minutes, you ate a little bit of a chatzanim. At the end, they ate zog. Still, since you ate isser ve'isser and that shiur, therefore, the Brayse says, and the Torah was koilol them together, you will be chayiv. You combine them together. It's all one davar ha'asur, and you'll be chayiv malchus. Very good. Okay, moving on to the new Mishnah. Called as the Brazilian Mishnah, batzek shebesitke yareva, dough that was inserted to seal, to fix the trough. We're speaking about a kneading trough, and since you knead by putting water and flour, it was important for these kalim not to have any perforations. The water is going to seep out. So if someone put dough as fixing the keli, here our Mishnah says like this, that if there is a kazayis in one place, there was a big hole or more, then chayiv leva'ed, then you are obligated to dispose of it. It's not batel to the keli. However, v'im lav, that's the gears of the Mesodas Hashas, if it's less than a kazayis, batel b'miyutoi. Because of its small size, that is the reason why it becomes batel. It's not food, and there's no issue with you keeping it over Pesach. Wow. Now, a heads up, as the Gemara is going to further expand the Mishnah with many other braises, that really the end will be that every keli is divided into 3 parts. You have the base of the keli, in which a hole and its seal, the seal is most essential. Then you have the walls of the keli, the area, the lower parts of the wall, the areas that when you are kneading a dough, the dough is leaning on those walls. It's not essential, but it's very functional. And then you might have an area on top of the walls, but near the rim on the top, near the lip, that even if there's a hole, it's nicht gefährlich. Not every of the water splashes up, and maybe it's going to go out through the wall, nicht gefährlich. And that will be of great significance. But in our Mishnah, no word is mentioned of that. In Mishnah, speaks about one thing, one criterion, kazayis, less than a kazayis. Now the Mishnah says, v'chein le'inyan ha'tumah. And the same thing is when it comes to tumah. Now, l'chu'ura, we're speaking about a keli that became tummy, and you have to take it to the mikvah, right? And like we know today when we're toivel kelim, because it belonged to a goy, so, many kelim have stickers on them, you have to take the sticker off. If you left the sticker on, was the tefillah good? And the rule by tefillah is, were you makpid? Are you planning to leave it there? If you're not makpid, then generally, certainly midoraisa, it's not a chatzitza. If it bothers you that something that's not keli is on the keli, then you got a problem of chatzitza. So the Mishnah says, im makpid olav chaitzitz. If you want it to remain there, if you want it to remain there, it's fixing your keli, then harehu ka'arev, then it becomes part of the trough. And the obvious question is, the Mishnah says the word v'chein, but there is no v'chein. It's different rules. The Reisha, Pesach, Chametz is about a kazayis. Seifa, Tuma, is about Hakpada. How can you say V'chein? It's not going on the same track. That will be the issue that we'll have to address. But before we get to the Seifa, let's begin now with the Reish. Now we have two versions of Shmuel's qualification. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, but we already said Balpeh, the whole thing. That now, as we learn on, it will become clear that there's another question here that the Mishnah doesn't explicitly mention, which is, where is the hole in the trough? The Midrash of the Mishnah is only taught where the dough that's sealing the keli is in a location that is not being machazik, means where it is not holding water. In other words, it is not in the base. It's not in the base. And that's why if it is a kazayis, it's not batel. In the beginning now of the Gemara, we're only going to have a keli divided into two parts, the base and not the base. But if it's put in the area that mamish holds the water, which is the bottom, then even if the dough, that is your plug, that is your jeitinho brasileiro to fix it, is a kazayas or more, ain't a chayv levad. Because since it's essential for it to be there, it's more that you're not makbid. You need it to be there. It's batel to the keli. It's not food, it's keli. Michlal, that the first version, that the pachus mikazayis, notes if Shmuel is learning the whole kazayis versus non-kazayis to the top of the keli, so now we have gavaldik leniency, like a double kula. In the base, everything is batel. Even on the top, if it's less than a kazayis and a chayv levayr. Okay, so that's version number one. However, there are others that learn this qualification of Shmuel on the Seifa. What words of the Seifa? Now we're quoting the Seifa that the imlav, then batel b'miyutay. Okay, if it's less than a kazayis, if it's not a kazayis, then it's batel. On that, when do we say that less than a kazayis is okay? You have to have two criterions to be lenient. You have to have two reasons. Number one, it's less than a kazayis. And number two, because it's put in the base. It's put in the base, meaning that it's essential for it to be there. But if it's not in the base, then even if it's not a kazayis, a double chumrah here. Chayv levayr. In other words, says the Gemara Mechlal, according to the second version, the kazayis, if the Mishnah is speaking about the base, that it has to be in the base less than a kazayis, that if you do have a kazayis, afilu b'makim ha'asui lechazek, even if it's in a place that holds the water, still chayv levayr. Okay. So that's the first version is very lenient relative. The second version is very chamur. It's the only time you are allowed to leave the seal inside the keli is only if it is in a place where you need for that place to be sealed. If not, you have no keli, which is in the base of the keli, and it's less than a kazayis. Pi Chasidus, it's very meaningful. We're speaking about bittul. So size is, be humble. We're not tzaddikim. Epis, we have gaiva, which is not good, but it's something this year, but it should be less than a kazayis. And we should always be, insert ourselves in a shlichus where what we do is important for Hashem. So then we're saved. We have to have both. We have to be in a place where where our avodah is needed there. You have to be on a mission, and we have to also be less than a kazayis. It's not enough to say, "Oh, I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing the right thing," but I can be arrogant. That's not going to work. Now the Gemara says that Tanya Kalishna Kama and Tanya Kalishna Basra, and as the Gemara goes on, Tanya Kalishna Kama, which is more lenient, and here it's explicit that basik, if you have a dough, shebesit keyadeva, that was inserted in the cracks of a trough, of a kneading trough, if it's put in a place that's holding the content, and we're saying right now we're not into three places here in Amud Aleph, for two places, the bottom or the top, then eino chaytzitz. Nekuda, or eino chaytzitz means mikvah when it's tamei, and the eino oivid. You're not oivid bal yirah bal yamatzah. Here, doesn't matter even if it is a kazayis. If it's in the bottom, it's okay. However, the first wide line, but if this dough is stuck in a crack that's not in the base, then aleph, it's a chatzitza if you're taking it to the mikvah, and base, you are oivid bal yirah bal yamatzah. I know Bali Roba Yimotza is a machlokes rishonim, but going back to the beginning of this Perek, Rashi says it's about Bali Roba Yimotza. Bamed Varam Amurim, only because I is. Aval b'pachas because I is. Afilu b'makom she'eno asel lechazik. Eino choitzitz ve'eino oiver. And the logic is, guys, you don't want to have a hole in your keli, and you put it there for you to keep it there. You don't plan to leave it out. So there's no kazayis, even though it's not essential, it's okay. Clearly, kalish lekama. The last line in the Amid and the Tanya kalish labasa. Another braisa number 2. Batzek shebesitke yareva, dough that's inserted in the crack of a trough. So like this, the makom ha'asei lechazek, if it's in the place of the keli that holds the water, which means in the base, daf memhei amid base, then it's not a chatzitza if you're taking it to the mikvah. Then over Pesach you're not oiver. However, b'makom she'eino asei lechazek, but if it's not in the bottom, then choitzitz and v'oiver. Bamed varam amurim. What? That if you have it b'makom ha'asei lechazek, you are okay. That's only if it's not only in the base, but it's little. The pachas mikazayis, aval b'kazayis, afilu b'makom ha'asei lechazek. If you have the sheet of a kazayis, even if it's in the base, choitzitz v'oiver. Now, many times that's the way it is. So it's taka 2 braises that have different rules, different criteriums. One is more lenient, one is more machmer. Many other times we try to reconcile different braises, not to create a machlokes tanoim. The initial approach of the Gemara is, well, kashan adadi. I don't like it that you have braises that don't have the same rule. And on that says Rafuna, since we're not speaking about mishnayos, we're speaking about braises. I mean, that's the underlying of everything, that braises were not as authoritative as mishnayos. And especially you have to know, where did those braises come from? Who taught those braises? Rabbi or not Rabbi that already made it even less authoritative. And Afuna said, because of that, Samei kilta mikame chamirta. The one that's more lenient, which is the first braisa, should be erased. It's a mistaken braisa, and allow the second one that insists for those 2 dinim. In order for you to be allowed to leave the dough in the cracks and not to be either bali rabbi matzah, aleph, it has to be less than a kazayis, and it has to be in the base. The makom asel lechazik. However, Rabbi Yosef says to Rav Huna, Tanoyi shakalt ma'alma. What are you removing the Tanoim from the world? No, there's no reason to say that you have to erase one. Tanoyi. I know it's a machlokes Tanoim. I see it's a machlokes Tanoim. Once there is already established machlokes Tanoim, so then each Tana over here in these braises will follow already a known other Tanoic opinion. Now, where do we have it? Where do we have the machlokes Tanoim? The Tanya. Hapas she'itsham, a loaf of bread that became moldy. Here we go. A loaf of bread that was once edible and now it's moldy. Says the Braisa Chayev Levayid, you have to still get rid of it before Pesach comes. Why? Because since even moldy bread, if you were to crumble it up, it could be used as a so'oir agent, as a yeast agent, as a leavening agent. I know it's moldy, but if you were to put a little bit of this moldy bread in another dough, it would cause the other dough to rise better. So who cares that it's not edible? Let me ask you a pashut question. So'oir, I don't know if you ever tried. Did anyone here eat yeast? The Torah explicitly said that yeast is chametz, super chametz. So it is not edible. I don't care if it's edible. If it's functional and if it causes chametz, that's your chametz. So the Tanakama says, I don't care that it used to be edible. The Taka here, it's not yeast. Here it used to be bread. And now before Pesach, it already got the moldy. Since it still has a function for creating chametz, it's chametz. However, Rab Shimon and Elazar Aimer, there's another detail here. I get it. If you, Taka, are going to designate this moldy bread to use it as so'oir, of course, Yechayev Levayid. But that's only b'mikuyemes la'achila. First white line. Where you plan to use it, la'achila doesn't mean to eat it. La'achila means you plan to use it to create other doughs, to make other doughs chametz the quicker, for eating purposes. Avol, however, the moment you have something that used to be chametz, but you don't plan to use it for food, either to eat it or to have this becoming a leavening agent, your designation of an item before Pesach has the koyach of changing its status. And the example that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar gives is that people used to have so'ir, and again, there's no kalim. In a third world country, what happens if you have a block of so'ir and you say, you know what? I don't need all this yeast. I need a stool. I need a benkel. I'm going to use this block as my chair. It's mamish so'ir. Gavaldik question. Here, nothing even became moldy. Nothing changed. It's the same so'ir. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar holds, Abel koifes so'ir sheyichad al yeshiva. If a koifes means a block, a shtick of so'ir, you only decided to use it as a chair. You won't mevatel it from achila. And therefore, in this bread, if you don't plan to use it for a leavening agent, guys, this is before Pesach. Since food is now before Pesach, not roy lachilas adam, it became moldy, so it loses its status according to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Now, this is mamish related to our Mishnah, and subsequently to the two baraisas, because when you take a piece of dough, taka chametz, and you use it as a seal, it becomes the fixer, it becomes the glue, the insert. You're not going to eat it. You were meyached it for keli. So therefore, we should be the first baraisa that's taka so lenient, should follow Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. So the comment Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, batla, no, this is a machlekes tanoim. Michlal, the Tanakama sover, they like batla. Alma, we see that kosova, this goes on the Tanakama, that kol kazais, the moment it's something chashuv, even if you were mevatel it, it's not batel. It's not batel. And that's why the second brayso, which will follow the Tanakama, if you have a kazayis and you put it in the base of the keli, you mamash need for it to be there. I'm sorry, it's chametz, it's a kazayis, it's not batel. But the first brayso, we do have a Tanach Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar that subscribes to bittul even on a kazayis. Our Mishnah differentiated between a kazayis and not. All of that only works because, like we explained in Amad Aleph, the Mishnah's differentiation of a kazayis or not is if it's high up in the keli. But if it's in the base of the keli, even if it's a kazayis, it's batel. So therefore, we know there's a machlokes tanoim. Hold on. So Amalei Abaye, you're right. When it comes to the question of whether a kazayis or something more than a kazayis, that you designated this to become a keli, a chair, a trough, correct. Here Yitaka found already a pre-existing machlokes tanoim. Taratzta bekazayis. But there's another machlokes between these two baraisas, if they're both authoritative. And that is pachus mikazayis. In the first baraisa, smaller than a kazayis is always batel. Right, always batel, even if it's on top of the keli. In the second baraisa, even less than a kazayis, if it's not in the base, won't be batel. We never found another place where we have a machlokes tanoim. And obviously, the fact that Rafuna said that sami, that erase it, there was a doubt whether this is authoritative or not. So and Rabbi Yosef is also not telling him you can't erase it. Stam, machlokes tanoim. Rabbi Yosef's comeback is, I know of a machlokes tanoim, but that machlokes is only by a kazayis or greater. The other part, which is if it's less than a kazayis, whether it needs something other than just it's okay or not, we don't find any other place for there to be a machlokes tanoim. And therefore, Rabbi Yosef continues by not allowing him to erase any of these two braisas. But now, we spoke this out on Amad Aleph, he's going to not divide a keli into bottom, mokim ha'oso lachazik, versus the top. We're going to divide every keli into three parts. Bia, to three levels. Elo hava Rabbi Shimon Elazar, and v'loy kashem. Braisa number one, which is more lenient, is b'mokim lisha, speaking about a hole in the place where you need. Braisa number two, which is more machmed, is speaking about shaloi b'mokim lisha. And again, the three places, I'm going to give numbers. The base we'll call area number one. The lower part of the trough, not the base, but when you put the dough and the flour, it's the walls in which that is laying. We're going to call that area number two. So it's not essential. It's not the end of the world if there's a hole, but it enhances. It's advantageous very often for that to be plugged up. and area number 3 are towards the height of the walls, even though sometimes the water splashes up there. And if there's a hole, some of that water will escape, but you can't say that it enhances because it's barely ever used. And now, before we go on, Rashi goes through a whole arichos, but around 7 lines before the end of the narrow lines, Rashi explains the way, Rabbi Yosef is really explaining that the Bachlal, there's no machloikas tanoim. Both of the Braises, first of all, everyone subscribes to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Everyone subscribes now to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, according to Rabbi Yosef, that if you are miyachet chametz for something else, it becomes batel. Nekuda. The machloikas will be each Braisa speaking about another one of our 3 numbered designations. Let's read a little bit of Rashi inside. Again, 7 lines before the end of the narrow lines. The hachi ka'ama, tanakama. The first Braisa. The makim ha'asi lechazek. If the dough is in the bottom, number 1, you're going shulayim, shemekabel masamayim, afilu kazayis. Everyone will subscribe to the leniency that we learned from Shmuel, the first leniency. If it's in the bottom, essential, even a kazayis and a oiver. But if it's not in the bottom, but not in the bottom means in area number 2, not in area number 3. Going the fanois in the walls, but which walls? The makom lishohu, where you're kneading. The lav makom mayim. It's not where the water which goes all the way to the bottom, but it goes to the sides, but to the lower sides. So there, yes, chaytzitz, yes, you'll be oiver. However, that's only if it's a kazayis, or it's an area number 2, an area in the bottom, area number 1, even a kazayis is batel. In area number 2, it depends. If it's a kazayis, it won't be batel. But if it's pachos mikazayis, afilu b'defanis namayeno chaytzitz. Why? The first line under the Gemara, because the kiven de mahani purta, lachazik isa kishemafashvishin, the lashon sham, so batel. And number 3, ushaloi b'makim lisha, that's all the first Braisa, which is all the way in the top. Okay, going safa elyahu, that's the first Braisa is not even talking about that. Lo aida b'hai mida. But indeed, even the first Braisa will be maida that over there, even less than a kazais is not batel. That's Braisa number 1. Braisa number 2 is speaking about area 2 and area 3. Everything fits now. No, it's the higher up you go, the more conditions you need for it to be batel. So when you learn Braisa number 2 and he's taka adding more conditions, that's because he's speaking about the higher level. Braisa number 1 is speaking about number 1, number 2, and Braisa number 2 is speaking about number 2 and number 3. It works, it's perfect. And there's no machlekes, and now he holds that these 2 Braisas both subscribe, not like the Lishna Kam of Shmuel. Not like Lishna Kam. They both subscribe that even if you have chametz more than kazayis or more, if before Pesach you were miyached it for some functional kalim, it becomes a keli, it becomes a shiur, it's taka batel. It's taka batel. Let's go back. Let's go back in the Gemara.
Wait, doesn't the Lishna Kam of Shmuel agree with that? I thought it's the Lishna Basra of Shmuel that disagrees with that.
I just said the Lishna Basra of Shmuel, according to Rabbi Yosef, will not be following neither of these Braises. The
right,
Lishna
Kama works.
Lishna Kama works for both. That's the beauty. Okay. And both Braises, there's no machlekes tanoim. They're speaking about, again, Braisa number 1 is speaking about the bottom and the middle, and Braisa number 2 is speaking about the middle and the top. And the higher up you go, the more chomer you have to be, because there the crack is not initial; it becomes less significant. Amar Rav Ashi, loy tema shaloi b'makim lisha. When we learn about this concept that we just introduced, that in the highest part of the keli we called area number 3, and over there, even if it's less than a kazayas, and you plan to leave it there, it's not batel. It's not batel because it's not needed there. Don't say that chumrah is only agaba de agana. It's only if it's stuck on the outside. On the top means, there's a thick lip on the top, and the crack was on the outside. So there is where we say it's why would it be batel. It's b'chlal not needed. That's not true. Even says Rav Ashi, Ella, even asifsa da agana, even on the lip, even if the crack is in the inside of the keli, but all the way in the top, there it's also never batel, even less than a kazayis. I pshita, it's not a pshita. There is a chiddush to that because mal de tema zimna da atav umati lo hasam. There are times that when you're kneading inside a keli, some of the water spritzes up, and it's going to hit the edge, and if the edge will be plugged, as you plugged it, you're going to save that drop of water. So there is some enhancement. So maybe here you should also say that if less than a kazayas and you plan to live it there, no, that's the chiddush kamash malan, that we do divide a keli into 3 areas and the topper parts of the walls. Since it's hardly ever going to be saving any water, it's insignificant. I don't care if there's a hole there. And even though you're the balabas, you want to fix your keli, I don't care. And even though it's less than a kazayas, I don't care. It's chametz, it's dough, halachically it's not batul.
Rabbi,
Yes.
does the inside of the keli versus the outside of keli come into play? Like if there's a crack on the outside, but it doesn't penetrate all the way through.
Then for sure it's never batul.
Even less than a kazayas?
For sure. Yeah. There's zero function there. Zero.
Well, you want the keli to be smooth.
Who needs it to be smooth? It's a kneading trough.
Yeah, but if you're making a stool, right? There it's also not being used.
No, I disagree with you, because by a stool there's a function to the stool. You need to sit on something. But you are using the chametz as your stool, or you are miyachad it for you. What are you doing with this?
Okay,
right. Now this is he's quoting Rav that halacha is Rab Shimon ben Elazar, because this is really now the new topic that we're talking about. If a person is miyached mamish chametz for another function before Pesach, did that nullified status as food? Yeah, we pass like Rab Shimon. Says the Gemara, Rav said that? No, because Rabbi Yitzchak bar Ashi Omar Rav, that you know when you are mevatel dough or so'oid as a shiur im toch panel batit, it's not enough for you to designate mentally. You have to do an action. We had this so much in Shabbos. Remember by Mutzah, if you take something that's not a keli, you want to use a rock as a door holder. Is it just enough for you to mentally designate it, or do you have to do a maisa in the stone to throw it on people that are machal Shabbos? Only then are you mevatel it from Toiras Muktzah. Same thing over here. Here, Rav says that only if you smeared the so'oid with some sort of lime, some sort of paint, which mamish you expressed through action that it's a shiur, then it's batul. Which means, and this is Rav, toch, if you smeared it, then it's batul. Loi toch loi. So what did Rav say? So says the Gemara too. First of all, manda masnaha le masnaha. Indeed, I mean we're quoting either Rav Nachman Omar Rav, and then we're quoting Rabbi Yitzchak bar Ashi Omar Rav. One of them has it wrong. One of them is misquoting Rav, and no one can subscribe to both statements. Or Amri, that you got the version of the second one wrong. That Omar Rav Nachman Omar Rav ain't halacha ke Rab Shimon. Not halacha. Oh, ain't halacha the Omar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Ashi Omar Rav im toch b'fnei betit batla. The there's a machlekes. And the whole point of the statement is that Rav is saying that we don't pass like Rab Shimon ben Elazar, because Rab Shimon ben Elazar does not demand for you to smear it. The whole word of Rab Shimon ben Elazar is that your yichud, your designation, changes its title from oichel to non-oichel before Pesach. And the latter version is that Rav Dafke did not pass like this. Okay. Let's go now that we had wherever the kazayas will be needed. Our Mishnah, don't forget, spoke about the kazayas. According to the last way we understand the Gemara, the last approach in the Gemara of Rabbi Yosef is that in area number 2, the criterion will be a kazayas. What happens if in that area you have many little cracks, you plug them all up with dough? If you were to add all those shtikalach dough together, you would get the shiur of a kazayas, but it's not in one location. And now another nuance, the chut shel batzek b'neihem. There is a little string of dough that is connecting these two plugs. That string is not needed to fill in a crack in the keli, but there happens to be a string of dough. Does that string of dough combine the two hafazesim? So says Rav Nachman bar Shmuel, Royin kol she'il yinot lachut. If you were to schlep that string of dough, its connection to both hafazesim is so strong that v'nitolam imai, you would then drag out both plugs, which makes them all considered connected. Then you're chayiv levai. But the imlav, even though now they're connected through this string, but through the chut, but it's a shvach chut. And Amarullah. This, I agree to that. But this rule is only said when it comes to a trough. What happens in something similar? Abel babayis. What's the case of babayis? Let's learn pshat over here. You have a floor, and you have holes in your floor in your house, holes in the floor in your house, and you plug them with dough, and you don't have a kazayis in one area. Now, it's mamish like area number 2 in the keli, as the Rishonim explain, because it's not like area number 1. It's not essential. You know, when you have a keli that has a hole in the bottom, you can't use it for kneading. Kneading, you need to put water. If you have a little crack in the floor in your house, you can walk on it, but you can get hurt. It's not essential, but it enhances. So the same thing, the ground should be like area number 2 in the keli. So what about now do we say that if you have 2 half-azasim that are not connected with a string, that they're not mitzvah, says Uli, here we can't be that lenient. Here, even though they're not connected at all, but you have in your house the sum total of a kazayis of dough, a little bit in this crack, a little bit in that crack, you are chayav levayim. And my tamam, because people sweep their floors. The zimnin, the kanishlu, you will gather them when you sweep, when you clean your floors. And then they will be combined together. The nafligabi hadadi. Masha'inkin, in a kneading trough, you don't sweep it. Even the way they used to clean it, nothing other than you purposefully removing those plugs, nothing would have removed it, which is why it does not combine unless there isn't only a string of dough connecting it, but it's strong. Omarullah. So they asked in the West, okay, now that we accept that Babai is chayiv, it's mitztaref, what happens if I own 2 homes, the ground level and the second story, right? 2-story home. In the ground level, I have a crack in the ground and I put in a piece of dough, not a kazayis. On my second story, I had a crack in the ground, I put another half a kazayis. I do sweep my house, but how far are we choishish that I'll sweep the upstairs and I'll sweep the downstairs and I'll put all of the remnants together? Mahu. Similarly, if you have a house and a portica right outside the house, as we just came off Eidovin, by Isvach Sadra, and a sum total, there is a kazayis, or shtei batim, not like the way you think 2 houses here in LA, but the fact is one is inside the other. In other words, there's some possibility that when you sweep, you'll sweep them both at the same time and you might gather everything together. So mahu teku. Okay, let's go back to this dough that became
Rabbi, if you have 2 shtiklach dough in the same keli, but there's no string attached, then l'chol deis, it would be considered separate. That's what we're
in area number 2, correct. In the area of the keli where the kazayis creates the problem, the kula alma is considered separate, correct. Right. We learned in a brayse. Hapasha ipsha, if you had bread that's moldy, and what's shot moldy, the nifsala mila echala adam. Where's svika? This is important over here. In other words, it's only not roy lachilas adam, but v'hakelav yachala oichlam. Does it lose its status of food? So it says the Braisa metama tumas eicholim b'kebetza. What is the klal of tuma, my friends? Let's go. L'shitas Rashi. Food could acquire tuma in any small amount, but for food to have the koyach to impart, to convey tuma, you have to have oicholin in the shir of a kebetza. So says the Braisa that as long as the food started out as being food, even though now its quality was diminished, since a dog is still able to eat it, it does not lose its status of a cholin. And if it is tamei, or if you have other foods that are not moldy, but you don't have a kebetza of it, and you're being mitzvah of some of this, and together now you have the betza, yes, you have a cholin with the shear of a kebetza that can convey tumah. Number 2, says the Braisa, nevertheless, in other words, we are considering it food. It's still food. But like Rashi reminds us from the Mishnah Daf Yud Daled, the whole beginning of Rab Chanina's Kana Kehanim, that we have a machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi, whether you can burn chametz, that's truma, to hide it in tameya. Rabbi Meir was the one that says you can do it, since you have to destroy it anyway. Rabbi Yossi was machmer, but Rabbi Yossi is moide that since it's not roy lachilas adam, even though it's still roy lachilas kelev, here, at least on Erev Pesach, will be moided to Rav Meir that Truma Tohoira and Truma Tameh can be burned together. However, says the Braisa, Mishum Rav Nasan Amru, no, Eino Metamo. One thing is important, Chavre. We're not speaking about on Pesach. We're speaking about prior to Pesach. If food is no longer roy lachilas adam, it's not food. It's not food. If you need to have a kibetza of food, which you need to have to be metame to convey, and you have part of food that's roy lachila, but you want to use this, if it's not roy lachila, the second opinion of Nassan is lenient. It's batul mitoiras oicholin. Now, come on, Ozla Hadetnan. Now that we have this machlokes in a brayso, now we will know who is the author of the Mishnah in Taharos, where it says, Klal B'Taharos, Kol HaMiyuchal Oichel Adam, anything that's meant to be eaten by people, Tamei, Achi, Pasal Melachel Kelev, once it was Takaroi Lachilas Adam. Even if now it got ruined a bit, but it only would lose its status of a cholin. This is a big chumrah. This is something that, by the way, we say on Pesach for chametz. But here we're speaking about Tumah. It has to be roy. So that's not like Rab Nassan, as we just learned in Abraisa, because Rab Nassan holds that for Tumah and Tara, something that becomes nifsal mila achilas adam is not called oichel. Let's go weiter. Ton Rabbanon, areva suabdonim. If you have a trough that's not used for kneading dough, but they used to make skins into hides, were made into leather, they were made into parchments. And that was a very smelly work. They were called abdonim, they were tanners. And they also used to need troughs in which they would put the skin. And one of the ingredients that were used was flour, and there is water. Now is that edible? It's disgusting. So is that a problem for Pesach? So if there is flour that was put in these troughs within 3 days before Pesach, it's still considered chametz enough, chayiv levayer, and according to this Tana, even if there is hides in them, which makes it disgusting, who is going to eat that? I don't care. Very chomer d'kapiyim. Now chametz b'Pesach, many times we have Tanoim that are very machmir. However, koidim shloisha yamim. But if you put the flour in these troughs 3 days prior to 3 days before Pesach, then it's completely bottled because it's so disgusting. Is garnished. Rab Nassan is always more lenient. Now he'll be consistent. As he is more lenient by Tumah, he's also more lenient by Pesach. That there is this 3 day cutoff period. That's only that's only if there are no skins in there. So even though there is the smell, the stink, which also is ruining the kemach, but at least there's no skin. If you put skins in that trough, even if you put kemach within 3 days, even as we'll see, you put kemach within 1 day, it's so disgusting that it's right away it loses its status of food. And on that Omar Rava, you should know, halacha ke Rab Nassan. Rab Nassan was not only speaking about toich shloisha, he meant even yom echad, even sha'achas. Okay, we're going to have to stop over here and begin a little bit more tomorrow, but beautiful. So what we learned today is the concept of bittul, the very important klal. So you have a few criterions. Were you miyachadid for something else? That's Rav Shimon ben Elazar. On top of that, we learned in our Mishnah, there is a concept of a shiur of a kezayis, that the larger the amount, the more it is significant. So to say, objectively, at least in certain areas of the keli, it will never become batal. And then we also learned now at the end about chametz, the foods whose quality became inferior. Pesach Bachlal is more chomer for other dinim, but even when it comes to Tumah, we have this very important machlokes tanoim that we'll have to remember for tomorrow, that Rab Nassan is the one that's lenient, and the Chachamim hold that since it was already food, it only loses its status of food if it's not roy, even lachilas kelev. Up until then, it's called a cholin enough that it can still convey Tumah, God willing to be continued.